Okay, so we're taping review of topics 3.4, 3.5, and 3.6 for A-Push that we covered this week. We're going in a little bit more depth. The first thing we're going to talk about is the Enlightenment. I drew a light bulb because it is, when you see a light bulb in a cartoon, it is an age of ideas. And the Enlightenment is an age of ideas and free thinkers. The Enlightenment thinker in America was Ben Franklin. The Enlightenment thinker in this course is John Locke, who influenced what document? What document did John Locke influence? Say it loudly. Declaration of Independence. The three French dudes that we'll talk about with the Constitution were Enlightenment thinkers. Do you remember them from last year? Any of them? Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau. These are people that are thinking about ideas, deism, which is a belief that God existed, but he didn't control daily lives, that he created a universe and natural laws and people controlled the universe. It's a little different idea from a Christian point of view. They believed in rational thought, and the social contract was an Enlightenment ideal that people form government to promote equality and liberty. Okay? Thomas Paine writes a pamphlet called Common Sense, which quite literally says what? What's that pamphlet say? Somebody in the room tell me. What's Common Sense say? Julian.
Said that the small island should not rule the large colonies.
Yeah, he basically says that in clear and forceful language that the colonies should be independent for a variety of reasons. That the satellite should never control the planet. That's his phrase, but it makes sense. That they need us more than we need them. That we've been economically self-sufficient. 3.5, which if you're following along is on page 104. It starts off with the first Continental Congress. It's a timeline. I'm going to turn the camera over to the board, the whiteboard, so I can rewrite the timeline because people wanted the timeline, even though it'll be backwards, I think, but I'm going to rewrite it anyway. So let's do this timeline again. Even expanded a little. 1774 is the first Continental Congress. April 1775 is Lexington and Concord. The war begins. July 1775 is the first true battle at Bunker Hill. The second Continental Congress meets in July. And by 1776, Matt, what day? What day was the Declaration of Independence? What day? What day was the Declaration of Independence?
4th of July.
4th of July.
Oh, man.
That is where the Declaration of Independence is written. The war itself ends in 1781. The treaty that we'll talk about Monday or Tuesday, the Treaty of Paris, is in 1783. That gives us all the land of the Mississippi River. This is Yorktown. What was the turning point battle? Because the French joined us. That's a little timeline for you, Sarah. That's all the stuff that we need to know for this era. Okay, I'm going to turn the thing back over here. Topic 3.5 talks about the First Continental Congress and what they decided there. What's the most important thing that was decided at the First Continental Congress? What's the most important thing that was decided? That if they didn't go back to the way that it was before salutary neglect ended, that they would meet again. That's the most important thing. Do they meet again? Yes. What city are they meeting in? Philadelphia. When the fighting begins, what city is it outside of? Where's all this fighting, this war? Bunker Hill, Lexington and Concord. Where is all that? What city? Hello? Boston. Thank you. Turn to 106. Congress adopts a declaration of causes and necessities for taking up arms. Eventually, they draft a Declaration of Independence. They tried for peace. They even bolded an olive branch petition. Did it work? No. Then, the rest of 3.5 And notice, it's really only 2 pages in all of AMSCO. You think it'd be more. Talks about the strengths and weaknesses of the competing sides, the role of African Americans in the war, 5,000 fought as patriots. The most notable was Peter Salem, recognized for bravery. Were there Tories that were loyal to the crown? Yes. 60,000 Tories fought with the British soldiers. I've seen 50,000 in other publications, so somewhere in that range. The war divided families. Ben Franklin's son stayed loyal and was a Tory to the crown. Okay, turn to 108. It talks about the American Indians and the Loyalists and whose side they were on. And then it talks about the cold winter in Valley Forge and how the first 3 years of the war were awful. That's why we need the turning point, which happened after the alliance with France. Louis XVI had no interest in aiding a revolutionary movement, but once he realized that we could weaken Great Britain, then he joined along. Why do you think Louis XVI didn't want to help us at first? Because what's he worried about? Yeah, and him getting beaten by Britain. Or he's worried that if he aids a revolutionary movement, maybe the same thing will happen in his country. It will. It will. A couple years later, right? Victory, and then the Treaty of Paris. And that's it. 3.6 we talked about today. Very important. Women of the era. On page 111, the Daughters of Liberty opposed British action. Some women like Molly Pitcher fought, took their husband's place, passed as men if they had to. Deborah Sampson. Most important paragraph is the economic role of how women are boss, doing amazing things while the husband's at war. It talks about the Republican motherhood, a new view of the role of women educating in the home to teach Americans their values and roles as citizens. Stuff we would call our civics or participation in government class. So women are taking on a new role. And then this very famous quote that I would annotate or highlight that I talked briefly about in class. Abigail Adams says, "I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." Are you paying attention? You need to pay attention. You don't have any notes out? You're not listening either, though. I mean, so either way doesn't work. Sorry, we're taping and I'm scolding somebody. So Abigail Adams on 112, that's a really important quote. You're going to see that quote. Honestly, it's as important of a quote as any quote. You're going to see it on the final, one of the regents or the regular. And you need to understand what she's saying, basically. Treat women better than the people that came before you did. Why is that such a big statement? Because it's like foreshadowing, isn't it? Like, no women were mentioning this, but she was. And this is where this is 80 years before the women's suffrage movement even begins. So Abigail Adams is fighting for stuff. She's a real trailblazer. She's a real trailblazer. The last things it talks about is the status of the slaves, the Native Americans, and then the very important impact internationally, how the American Revolution inspired the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution and other revolutions throughout humankind because of a government of the people. And that's about it. So that's a recap of 3.4, 3.5, and 3.6. Thanks for joining us.